والله يدعو إلى دار السلام ويهدي من يشاء إلى صراط مستقيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على عبده ورسوله ومصطفاه نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهداه. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Mercy to Mankind. Allahumma salli wa sallim alayh. We talked previously about the origin of the tribe of Quraysh and how Mecca started and what was the role of Abraham and Ishmael, may Allah, peace and praise be upon them all, had to do with that.
But Sheikh, in the previous session you've mentioned that the people there were following the religion of Abraham. But what about Christianity and Judaism?
That's a very good question. You have to look at the religious status just before the commissioning of the Prophet ﷺ, or being commissioned or revealed to. The religious status in general was as follows. The majority were pagans, and they were not pagans by birth, but after Abraham and Ishmael died, all the Arabs at that time were Muslims, in the sense that they have surrendered their will to Allah. They were following the teachings of Abraham and Ishmael. And this is the meaning of Islam, because all the messengers and prophets of Allah preached Islam, which is submission.
To the will of God.
Submission to the will of God. In the sense,
also the notion of Hanifiyya?
Al-Hanafiyya also is the same thing. Hanafiyya in Arabic means to go to one side rather than going in straight. And this means that they go astray from the crooked way, but their way is the straight path. So Islam is a submission to the will of Allah, and all the messengers and prophets of Allah preach the message, which is monotheism. Only worship Allah Azza wa Jal, who is worthy of being worshipped alone without associating anyone or anything else with Him. So they followed this monotheism, the teachings and the message of Abraham and Ishmael, for a long, long period of time, because they did not go anywhere. This is where they were born, and this is where they got their religion, and this is where they were practicing it, until one man left to travel abroad their boundaries. His name is Amr ibn al-Hayy al-Khuza'i. He went to the Sham, which is the northern area of the peninsula, where you find Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. This whole area is called Sham. And there he saw the idols, and he thought that they looked cool. So he thought, and this is by Satan, that by bringing them idols back to Mecca, we can get closer to Allah by worshipping them. So he was the first to introduce the idols to Mecca. And he was also the first to introduce the idea of letting the camels, sheep, cows to go without any movement, in the sense that they are not to be used in farming. The animals are not to be used for carrying them or carrying their cargo. And it was called, he was the first to make this as-sa'ibah. So, why did he do this? He is claiming that these cattle are only for their idols. So no one is to touch or talk or harm or use any of that. Now, the Prophet ﷺ told us that because of this, he saw him in hell going round his guts because of the paganism he introduced to those who only worshipped Allah Azza wa Jal. Therefore, people started to go into paganism. They started associating others with Allah to the extent that they had these idols in the Kaaba. They had 360 idols around the Kaaba. Some of it was made of wood, others was made of stones, and others were made of gold.
And some were made of dates.
And well, not in the Kaaba,
Yeah.
but to the extent people lost their minds, to the extent that an Arab would come and build a statue as an idol of dates and worship him the whole day. This is the idol is going to get me closer to Allah Azza wa Jal. And at the end of the day, once he felt hungry,
He would eat it.
he ate his god. And then the following morning he would make himself another
God.
god, maybe with another flavor, strawberry or whatever was available at the time. The problem is that they believed in Allah and in His existence. They believed that Allah Azza wa Jal is the Creator. They believed that Allah Almighty was also the one who makes people die. And they believed that Allah Almighty is the one that gives them their provisions. But Satan came to them through the idea of, why not get closer to Allah? You're not pure enough to get closer to Allah. So the best way is to have people to intercede for you, or to have objects to intercede for you. They started by worshipping these graves, started to worshipping pious people, and then ended up by worshipping stones, trees, any idols that they bring, thinking that these are the gods that should be worshipped in order to get closer to Allah Azza wa Jal.
Then, Sheikh, there are several kinds of monotheism. Monotheism of that Allah is the creator, the sustainer, the cherisher, and so on. And monotheism that Allah, the only and true God that be worshipped alone.
Okay.
Then
This is true. This is what we call tawheed. To worship Allah Azza wa Jal, not to associate anyone with Him. And this is divided into three sections. The first section is that people all share, pagans and monotheists. That is, that it is Allah, the Almighty, that has created the whole universe. It is Allah that gives life and takes it. It is Allah Azza wa Jal that gives the provisions to all mankind. This is the first monotheism. It's called Tawheedu Ar-Rububiyyah. And then the other form of monotheism is what we call Tawheed Al-Uluhiyyah, which means that all deeds, all actions, all forms of worship that we do must be directed only to Allah Azza wa Jal. So if I do not do this, this is shirk. If I pray to other than Allah Azza wa Jal, then my form of worship is going to other than Allah. This is shirk. This is associating others with Allah.
it's not enough to believe in the first one.
Of course it is not.
Yes,
And
as pagans.
of course, and this is why the pagans refuse the message of the Prophet ﷺ, and we will come to this inshallah in due course. Now, going back to the religions there, we had the pagans, but we also had the Christians and the Jews.
Yeah.
But in Mecca, there were no Jews at all. And believe me, there was no Hitler at all. So he did not have to do anything with that. But there were no Jews in Mecca. There were a handful of Christians. The majority of the Jews were in Medina and in Najran. And the Christians were in the Sham area with scattered bits and pieces here or there. But the majority of the people were pagans. Now, if you want to look at the political status of the people just before the revelation and the birth of Muhammad ﷺ, we will find that there were two types of people. Crowned kings that were appointed by the superpowers at the time, the Romans or the Byzantines, and the Persians. And there were tribes, different number of tribes that had no king, no crowned king, but they had leaders. If we look at Quraysh, and Quraysh, as mentioned before, is the tribe, the main tribe that was controlling and governing Mecca at the time. If we look at Quraysh, we would find that they did not have any kings, but they had a number of great rulers ruling them. So one great ruler was in charge of feeding and providing water to the pilgrims. One other great ruler was taking care of the mosque, Al-Haram. The other third ruler was in charge of trade and securing their trade paths and so on. In that aspect, we find that the people of Quraysh had many good attributes and ethics applied. But at the same time, you have to realize that the social aspects was not as one would have imagined or wished for. For example, though they had many good attributes, adultery and fornication was widely spread among them, to the extent that only few refuse to go and to be part of fornication. And we were told, as in the hadith of Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, that they had different forms of marriages. And this shows you the blessing of Allah upon us as Muslims. One form of marriage is the normal one. You go to a man and ask his daughter in marriage. He accepts, it's okay. The second form of marriage would be that 9 men come, or less, and they sleep with this woman, and at the end, after she is pregnant and she gives birth, she looks at them and says that, well, the father is this man. Yes. And the third form, of course, this is all adultery. Huh? The third form would be that a husband seeking to have a good and healthy son would look at himself in the mirror and say, I'm not the man. So he asks his wife to go and sleep with someone who is noble and rich and healthy, and once she's pregnant, he claims that son to be his. And the last and fourth type of marriage was the marriage of prostitution, which is not actually marriage, but a prostitute, once she's pregnant, they bring someone to try to identify the child, who's his father by his genes or by the way he looks. Alhamdulillah for the blessing of Islam. We have a short break, and inshallah we will be right back. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. We talked about the forms of marriages before the break. And of course, the result of marriage would be having children. Yeah, yes. So it's also appropriate to know what was the relationship between the Arabs with their children before the birth and revelation of the Prophet ﷺ. They were split into two. Some of them would love their children to the extent that they would give their lives in return. And unfortunately, the other part, they would bury their children alive, whether because of poverty or because of the fear of shame. And this would be mentioned in the Quran in a number of verses where it tells us that the Arab would, once having a child that is a female, that would wait until she is 6 or 7 years old and then take her to the desert, dig a ditch, throw her in it, and then bury her alive. And by far, this is one of the most major and greatest sin. How could a man be a man? How can a human be a human doing this? There are some reports that Umar ibn al-Khattab did something like this, and that he laughed and cried. And one of the things that made him cry, as the story says, that he once buried one of his daughters, and while he was trying to put the sand over her, she used to clean his beard from the sand. So whenever he remembered this, he cried. But this is not an authentic story, and we do not accept that Umar ibn al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, did anything like this. And the proof behind that is that his daughter, Hafsa bint Umar, was the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, which meant that she lived to marry, which means again that he did not do anything of that sort.
Before we move on, I have a question.
Okay.
Here we're supposed to be talking about the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. And I think when you study the biography, it starts with the birth of that person.
Okay.
But here we're talking about the conditions of the Arabian Peninsula before the coming or the birth of Prophet ﷺ. What this has to do with that?
The answer is very simple. You have to study the time and the location before the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, just to understand the situation, why he was revealed to them, why he was sent to them. Without understanding the circumstances surrounding his birth, without knowing the goods and bads of that situation, you would not be able to evaluate the importance of him being sent there. Because all the Arabs, all the sane Arabs at that time, thought that there has to be a light at the end of the tunnel. Life was so miserable, was so difficult to the community as a whole, that this chaos, this lack of order was unbearable. For example, it was not just the fornication and the way they treated their family, it was also the way they treated their tribes and next of kin. They felt very strong towards their tribes and next of kin. They had a very strong relationship to the extent that wars were initiated for the silliest of reasons. For example, a man slapped another man on the face. They had a feud. They quarreled a little bit. Each one went back to his family. His family came the following morning and they started fighting with the other family. They went back to their tribes and the tribes initiated a full-scale war. Simply because of a very silly problem. And it showed you that this is one of the good things, which is to be strongly connected to your relatives, but it was in a bad sense because it meant that you are ready to be an aggressor with your relative, though he is the unfair and the unjust person. Also, having said that, we have to know that the Arabs at that time had gambling in their blood, which is a very bad thing, which is forbidden in Islam. Gambling is a major sin. The Arabs at that time also adored intoxicants. But having said that, they did not have any cocaine, heroin, crack, or whatever. They had wine. And they loved wine so much to the extent that they used to call the grape tree as being generosity. Because whenever they drank, they felt so generous, they gave all their money while they were drunk. And they did so many bad things as well. But this was the only thing that remained in the memory after waking up and being sober. They thought that, I've lost everything. Well, this is part of generosity. They also, as mentioned before, used to kill their children, males and females, by burying them. And they, among them was spread getting women out of their clothing, nudity, and so on. And to our astonishment, we know during the pilgrimage season, only the people of Quraysh had the right to perform pilgrimage and tawaf, going around the Kaaba, wearing their clothes. Any other Arabs who came from outside Mecca was forced to make tawaf nude, women and men. And this was normal to them, though it is not normal to us as Muslim, where our religion teaches and preaches chastity and so on. And again, it was very normal to have feuds and to get wars initiated for any simple reason. So if an Arab did not have anything to do, he goes to his tribe and say, what about visiting our neighbors for the rest of the day? And they go and kill and loot whatever they can at that time. All of this was there among the Arabs. But this was not it. They had some good things in them, in the sense that not all the Arabs shared all of this being evil without any good ethics and morals. On the contrary, the Arabs were known, and still are, they're known to be very generous. The Arabs are known to be fulfilling their promises. So whatever promises they give and make, they usually keep them. The Arabs at that time were known to be courageous. And one would give away his life for any simple reason, just to prove that he is not yellow and he's not a coward. Also, the Arabs were known to be jealous, in the sense that if they're married, if they have girls, daughters, they are so jealous on them that they are willing to kill people if they simply say a bad word about their family. And they also had pride in them. And again, this is in the Arab standards before Islam, which meant that they would never beg. They would rather kill than beg. And this is pride, but it is un-Islamic, because killing is a major sin. So you might as well beg, which is far lesser sin than to kill. But the Arabs at that time, the Bedouins, the nomads, those who were the offsprings of Abraham and Ishmael, who lived in Mecca, had this pride in them to the extent that they would never ever allow anyone to control them. And that is why they were difficult to control. Now, going back to Muhammad's question, why are we talking about the environment that preceded the birth of the Prophet ﷺ? Just to tell you how things were. And there were Arabs that thought that there has to be a light at the end of the tunnel. Because with all these problems, with all these bad things happening in the society, the strong eats the weak, the rich deprives the poor from his rights. You had a very big gap in the society. You had people eating in plates made of silver and gold, while others could not find something to fill their starving stomachs with. So there were Arabs that were looking for a light at the end of the tunnel. Some of them was Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl, who used to worship Allah Azza wa Jal, and who used to buy these girls that their fathers wanted to bury them alive. He used to go to them before they kill their children and say, I'll buy them off for you. I'll give you money and take them and raise them on my own. He used to or depict the fact that people sacrifice a sheep, an animal, to their idols and say, Subhanallah, it is Allah who gave us rain and who grew the grass and who gave us this animal to feed from. And then you sacrifice it to another God. This is unacceptable. So Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl, our Prophet told us ﷺ, that he is a nation on his own and that he died on following the religion of Abraham, monotheism. Also there was Umayyah ibn Abi Salt, who was a poet, and the Prophet ﷺ used to love hearing his poems because he used to talk about worshipping Allah alone, about the things in the universe that only Allah alone can do it, as we were told by one of the companions that was traveling with the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet asked him, do you know any of the poems that Umayyah ibn Abi Salt used to say? So he said yes, and he started saying it to the Prophet, and the Prophet ﷺ used to love hearing these poems because there were Arabs who had this in them, that only Allah Azza wa Jal is worthy of being worshipped, and only Allah Azza wa Jal is worthy of being presented with sacrifice to Him, and all of these idols are not worthy of being worshipped. This was the set that the Arabs were living in, with the superpowers. The Byzantines and the Persians were surrounding them, no government ruling them, all these bad things and morals and ethics and bad behavior. The set was ready to receive the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm afraid that this is all the time we have for today's program. Inshallah, we will meet again. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Oh